Good morning. I have to confess it's a little embarrassing to stand up here and admit as a 30-year-old man my unconditional affection for a comic book character who makes his living by wearing blue and yellow pajamas. But it's a love that I can trace back since I was 4 years old, when my mind attached itself to the basic idea of Superman, that yes, indeed, one person could make a difference. To tell you how enamored I was with that proposition, it seems like only yesterday when I snatched away my mother's tablecloth and draped it around my shoulders as if it was a cape, taking off like a rocket down the street while she screamed frantically behind me in hot pursuit, yelling at me to put it back before it got dirty, all the while our neighbors laughing at us. But that wasn't yesterday, actually. That was actually just last Tuesday. So, shows you how I've progressed in my 26 years, I suppose. However, there is a day that does stand out more profoundly as one where I wish I had been Superman. I was living and working in Los Angeles at the time, and like a good son, I'd phoned my mother, who still lived here in Seattle, for our weekly Wednesday morning call, just to check in to see how she was doing. It ended up being one that I wished I could have missed. You see, my mother slogs through the daily grind of social work. So there are many days when she hears the worst of the worst. Many times it challenges her to just stay sane, as she puts it. And this particular day took the cake. As we began our conversation, I could tell by the breaking of her voice and her long pauses between thoughts that something ominous was brewing. Unfortunately, my assumption proved correct, as her previous day had concluded with the death of Elijah Brown, a young boy from our neighborhood, just shy of his 13th birthday, who was nothing less than a delight to everyone he came across. He had been shot while coming home from purchasing a pair of football cleats he had saved up enough money to buy the past 3 months by working odd jobs around our area. Killed for no other reason than what he happened to have, no other reason than he had happened to have gotten off the wrong bus at the wrong time, wearing the wrong color, and was mistaken for a rival gang member by his shooter. To make matters worse, not 2 hours before that tragic shooting, my mother had received a call from a woman who had been violently raped once again by her husband, right in front of her children, and was told by him afterwards that he would kill her and her kids if she tried to leave him or told anyone what had just transpired. This was a man in our community who was considered an upstanding person, a good man of God, he was fond of calling himself. She wanted so desperately to get away from him, but for whatever reason, no shelter would take her, and she had no other family to support her other than her attacker. This happened all in the same day, which had begun for my mother with a 14-year-old girl crying hysterically over the phone, barely able to catch her breath as she shared that she was pregnant by her father and had absolutely no idea what to do. That was later a day I would christen for a cure-all for the desire to live, as it would haunt me for quite some time. While driving to work, I remember wishing, just wishing, that somehow I could do something to change this thing, that somehow I could right all these wrongs, that I was the Superman who could turn back time. When I finally did get to work, I related to a colleague of mine all that had transpired back home. And I recall exactly what he said to me. He said, "Marcus, that's just the world we live in. And if it isn't busy going to hell, it's already there. You're not a Superman, so really what can you do besides grin and bear it? I mean, you can't change it, and who are you to even try?" You know, I had to admit that he was right. Not about the trajectory of the world, at least not entirely. But he had been right to ask, who was I to change it? That became a question that poured over every thought I had that day. Reason being, I didn't know. You see, in life, we seem to be bombarded, whether at work or at play, whether by the cynicism of ourselves or of others, with reminders of what we aren't in this life, that we aren't endowed with greatness, that we aren't geniuses, we aren't influential, we aren't powerful. Ergo, when it comes to the business of shaping this world, we are ultimately nothing more than children who should leave the activity of such things to the adults in the room, or the elites at the table. The best we can possibly hope for is to go about our lives as regular people, shopping, eating, surviving, and finding something to do to amuse ourselves in the time we're not occupied with the other three, repeating that cycle until death. Better to find refuge in the sanctuary of selfish endeavors, building your own structure of solitude while making an attempt to ignore all else around you as it crumbles. On that day, I could no longer accept that idea. And like most non-practicing atheists do when they're going through a crisis of conscience, I turned to Superman. However, it initially wasn't the one who flies in our fantasies, but the one who was unable to walk in real life. It just so happened that night, an old interview of the late Christopher Reeves was on television. This was a man who had played the character of Superman in 4 feature films, and is the actor most beloved for doing so, mainly for the reason that after being paralyzed in a tragic horse riding accident, he went on to embody what the word hero meant. And in this particular interview, he went on to explain its meaning. He said, a hero is no Superman, no angel, but an ordinary person who, in daring to act courageously without regard to any personal consequences, tests the limits of what others think we as human beings are capable of. They are the people who make changes others once thought were impossible in this world inevitable. It honestly took that a while to sink in, that neither the extraordinary nor sainthood was a requirement to be more than a bystander to the proceedings of this world. Because, you see, it was, after all, a serial adulterer who dreamt that content of character mattered more in magnitude than the color that covers our skin. It was, after all, a man who gave praise to Hitler and the theory of a superior, pure race, who imagined a world where peace reigned in every corner of it. And it was, after all, a woman who refused to speak out against the vile and inhumane practice of lynching that fought with unmatched fervor for the rights of a woman to be treated as justly as any man. Now, I suppose that's a harsh and peculiar way to identify Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, and Susan B. Anthony. And I don't mention their deficiencies for the sake of irreverence, nor to diminish their achievements. On the contrary, I mention them to accentuate the fact that all great men and great women are just that, men and women. Human beings with the same flaws and failings that are not just exclusive to us mere mortals. Instead of being disheartened by this revelation, it's that knowledge that comforted me. Because if what constitutes the worst of our heroes is not restricted from us, then neither is what constitutes the best. Their voices that spoke loudly for all those who couldn't find their own, well, we happen to come equipped with one. Their hearts that they binded to the progression of the condition of their human brethren, but one happens to beat in our chest cavity also. In their hands that authored the present we find ourselves in today, one free from the horrors of slavery, the absurdity of women's second-class status, and the insanity of criminalizing the act of love between two people who happen to share the same gender. If you look down past your wrist, most of us will discover a pair of our own. Your voice, your heart, your hands, and so many other things we find in ourselves that are so unremarkable. And because they serve as the same raw material that we share with all those idols we so admire. It is this material which we all possess that functions as a recourse for changing this world we find ourselves in. You see, because we live in a world that is not fair and is not just. We live in a world with egregious inequity between the privileged few and the growing legion of the weak. We live in a world where we divide ourselves by the artificial distinctions of race and religion and sexuality, we live in a world that is far from perfect, and most likely it never will be. But fortunately, we also live in a world that comes with no default setting to it, that has no law of nature that governs that things must always be this way. And it is this world that we must face, one where there is no Superman to wait for, as we oftentimes find that we are all we have. But we so too oftentimes find that we are all we need. Because this world cannot be saved by a man of steel, but by men and women of courage, of conviction, of passion, and of empathy. By men and women who aren't invulnerable and who indeed feel pain, adversity, and failure. It is those additional material that contribute to the ingredients that are so necessary in developing our abilities and knowing how to endure, overcome, and persevere on this earth we share. It is those abilities that prove of more significance in the shaping of this world than those of any superhuman. And look, I say that not as a naive Pollyanna who has visions of utopia, but as a man who has glimpsed reality. I saw this in Elijah Warren Brown's mother as she now devotes her life via her nonprofit to mentoring and nurturing young boys and girls in our community, doing all she can to make sure that no more mothers must bury their sons for pointless reasons. I saw this in the community of women who unequivocally supported the woman who had been raped by her sociopathic husband, providing asylum and healing for her and her children from a life that was hell. I saw this in the uncle of the girl who had been impregnated by her father when he and his husband became the caregivers to her and her child, restoring her faith in the sacredness of family. Now, as admirable as these acts are, I have no delusions that they alone are enough to alter the course of our world. No one action, no one person can. But what they function as, just like any act that encroaches upon all the darkness that surrounds us, is sparks. A reminder that this world, no matter how dim it may seem to us, is possessed of illuminating possibilities. It is these acts of ours that we pursue as individuals that, when taken together, feed the flame that is the force which dares to oppose all that is evil around us. It is at this point when we discover that we actually share a great deal with the fictional Superman. Because like him, we sense we live in a place that is so desperately in need of saving. And like him, we encounter a decision of great importance. We can pretend to be as meek and as mild as Clark Kent when he puts on his glasses, going on about our lives, masking our true selves, hiding amongst the anonymity, afraid to stand out as we acquiesce to our imagined weaknesses. Or we can look at ourselves, as I'm sure we often do, and know that there is more inside of us than we allow the world to see. That there is more inside of us that we are capable of accomplishing. And we can stand tall, and we can remove our glasses. And when we do this, we strive to be more than we are. So I ask you today, who are you? Who are you really? I'll give you a hint, because the answer is the same for all of us. We are whoever we choose to be. Who we choose to be. And I know whatever your decision is, that this world, our world we live, our country, our state, our friends, our family, our neighborhoods, our communities, await your answer with great anticipation. Thank you very much for the privilege of your time today.